for afternoon session. We are excited to offer preceptor development topics for the afternoon. Since I know that most of you will have a chance to precept either a student or a resident throughout the year. And so I think it's always good to learn some things about feedback. And I'm also really excited about talking about virtual or remote precepting. So that's been a challenge for quite a few people. And then finally talking about anti-racism. So we have some exciting talks for today. We'll have three separate talks that we're going to be doing. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker who's doing this. This is Dr. Chanel Whittaker, who is an associate professor of geriatric pharmacotherapy at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy in Baltimore, Maryland. She currently serves as the Director of Education and Training with the Peter Lamy Center of Drug Therapy and Aging and for the Geriatric Pharmacy Residency Program. Dr. Whittaker's practice, teaching, and research expertise include geriatric pharmacotherapy, chronic kidney disease, and health literacy or health communication. She has practiced in a number of team-based ambulatory care clinics, providing services to older adults and other patients with multiple chronic conditions for over 15 years. Her current practice sites include the Geriatric Patient Aligned Care Team Geripact Clinic, managing frail older adults, and the Renal Interdisciplinary Safety Clinic, managing veterans with chronic kidney disease at the Baltimore Veterans Affairs. So with that, I'll turn it over to her, who's going to be talking about how to provide effective criteria-based feedback. Thanks, Chanel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandeep. And I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. I'm just going to make this bigger so it's easier to see the whole screen. So yes, again, as Sandeep said, I have been on faculty and precepting for over 15 years. And during that time, I was kind of doing my stats. I've been a director for 9 years and through 2 accreditation cycles. I don't think I got any prizes for that, but it is a pretty big deal to go through those processes. But then along those, during that time, I'm sure I've had at least and precepted about over 100 trainees and done hundreds of evaluations. So I have a lot of experience with providing feedback and doing evaluations. But although I have all this experience, there are still times where I need to get feedback from other preceptors or other directors about how to deal with the situation. And that's really how this topic came about as we were going through the accreditation process. How can we do a better job of providing feedback where we are being clear as preceptors during our learning experiences so that the resident, one, knows what to expect or trainee knows what to expect, and there are no surprises, come the end of the experience. So I'll share kind of my learnings, but I also look forward to hearing, from you. Feel free to drop things in the chat if you have resources. It's after lunch, we're gonna kind of be relaxed, and I hope that this is a good experience. So let's get started. Oops, let's see. All right. So our objectives, the focus of my session today will be very much around crafting feedback. And as you craft feedback, you really have to start with a good structured process of evaluating the resident, but also providing the specific and clear evaluation criteria that you will use so that we are setting the resident up for success and not setting the resident up, right? So we'll talk about that process, and ASHP has given us a great framework to do that. And I'll just kind of touch on some of those components. Also, we'll take a look at critiquing some anonymous preceptor feedback and written comments to see how, both us as preceptors and also residents as you will be precepting, how we can try to provide clear criteria-based feedback so that it is objective as possible and the trainee can adjust their performance. And finally, we'll hopefully have an opportunity to practice providing feedback given a scenario. And the goal with this is that we all get a little bit better. Again, let's share our experiences with one another, but this is a lifelong process, a lifelong ongoing learning process of providing feedback. So we'll start with Matt and Melanie, and we'll first take a look at this video. And as you're watching the video, consider how Matt and Melanie might have contributed to the miscommunication with this performance evaluation. So I'm going to stop sharing this.
So that was my weekend, nothing special. What about you? You seem rather chipper for a Monday.
Today is a good day. It's my performance review.
Wait a minute. You're excited about the performance review?
My next meeting is a one-on-one. I have to deliver a performance review.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's with Matt.
Oh, I can see why you're so depressed.
Man, I'm stoked about this one. Because last time Melanie gave me kind of a bad review.
Last time I gave him an extremely negative review.
What exactly did she say?
You know, mumbo jumbo manager speak.
I couldn't have been more clear.
Like needing a little touch up here and there.
His appearance was sloppy, he was passive and unmotivated.
Maybe learn some more stuff.
And the quality of his work was completely substandard.
And we talked about my future.
I also said that I didn't see much of a future for him.
Dude, you have to read between the lines, but she was majorly hinting that I could go places.
I don't think he's gonna make it to the end of the year anyway.
With a little spit and polish, no big deal. So that's what I did. Got myself some spit and polish. Buddy, you're looking at Mr. Improved.
If anything, he's gotten worse. I don't know which is more objectionable, his social deficiencies or his technical incompetencies.
I mean, I busted my hump this last year. I even took some night classes at the community college.
I can see why you're so enthused about things.
It's more than that. I think I'll finally get that promotion I deserve. And believe me, with a new baby on the way, I could use all the cash I could get.
I'm putting Matt on probation, and that means no yearly bonus, but fortunately, I hear his wife has a good job.
Especially with my wife losing her job and all.
Sorry to hear about that, mate. Tell you what, you give me a call after the review and we'll celebrate over lunch or something.
Yay.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Well, call me for lunch later. I have a feeling you're gonna need to take a break.
Well, Matt, are you ready?
You bet. Now, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, I know. And maybe it's just nerves because my wife lost her job and all. But you'll see I deserve that promotion.
Promotion?
Yes. And I have you to thank. You know that little pep talk last time? And with being a new daddy and all. Anyway, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say.
Facing a crucial conversation?
All right, so that was Matt and Melanie. So let's look at the interaction between Matt and Melanie, and feel free to raise your hand or you can type in the chat box about how you think both Matt and Melanie might have contributed to, I guess I would say this would be a misunderstanding initially. We'll say misunderstanding. So any thoughts on that interaction? Hi there, Amanda. Yes, please do.
Okay, so I think there was definitely clearly some misinterpretation of maybe next steps and what he needed to improve upon specifically. So one thing I would say is being more specific about recommendations so that it's actionable, so that he has specific guidances about what he needs to do to perform appropriately.
Awesome. So yeah, so Melanie could have provided more actionable and clear feedback. Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Amanda. And now I'm going to do my professor thing and just start calling on people. So Pari, I see your lovely face. Would you like to share any feedback on this interaction?
I think it's very similar to what Amanda said. Like there was very like distinctive like feedbacks and like interpretations of the feedbacks, whether it be negative on the lady's side, and then the sir was taking everything in a very positive tone. Again, I think this can happen in reality, and it happens all the time. And just having that clear feedback and understanding of, hey, this is what you need to improve on, and how to improve upon that should be clearly communicated.
Right. So clear communication. I hear you saying, Pari, and then what is the expectation? And then also on Matt's side. So and I see some things in the chat from Alice. Provide goals for what's expected during the review. Absolutely. And Rimal, she was giving specific examples to her colleagues, but I'm not sure that that was directly addressed with Matt. Absolutely. No, I love that comment, Rimal. Thank you for sharing that. And Travis, I see your face. What did you think about Matt?
I think part of the issue, obviously, is the communication difference they had there. One thing I think is important too is not necessarily addressing it at just that set interval when the meetings take place, but perhaps having some sort of continuous review process or some more frequent check-ins so that it's not just an annual thing that, you know, he finds out he's not hitting the mark like he thinks he is.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that's amazing, Travis. So providing that formative feedback along the way, and whether it be verbal or written, that is so important, right? Because when we're all probably learning new things, maybe we go off course. We may imagine based on our experience before, and if it worked well for us, then we do it again. But if you're not providing constant feedback throughout the experience, the resident thinks, I guess everything's going great, and they sort of get blindsided, at the evaluation process. So back to the chat, we have a couple more comments here from Elizabeth. Providing written feedback also, yes, absolutely. And if it was meant to be so negative, Emily is saying, if the previous performance review was meant to be so negative, the employee probably should have been placed on a performance improvement plan with objectives, right? So I love that comment, Emily, because if you're giving sort of a verbal feedback with no kind of follow-up or documentation, it is very reasonable for a person to think, well, this is just feedback, and I can take it. But if it's pretty serious, the way she was suggesting to her colleague there, then I agree that probably should have been in writing. So that's an excellent point. And then Ibital, I apologize if I said that incorrectly, asking the person being evaluated to do a self-evaluation at the beginning of the interaction is good to gauge where they think they are. That is amazing, yes. And I think often I would do that if a trainee is not, if I think I am not on the same page with the trainee, and sometimes I just do it, just for practice, so they get practice doing it. But if I have a pretty good sense that we are not on the same page, I will ask them definitely to do an evaluation of themselves, because sometimes insight can be an issue. A person can really think, I'm great, I'm wonderful, but they're not really embracing sometimes actually looking at the criteria as they're doing that self-assessment. Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing that. And I'm going to ask one more question about this scenario, and then we'll move on, is how do feelings and your concern for the other person get in the way of evaluating their performance? Because this is like a real person-to-person thing. You feel bad, right? The guy's wife is having a baby, she lost her job, and she's about to give him a negative performance feedback. So Irene, what do you think about that? How might that make it more challenging when feelings get in the way? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly challenging situation. And the best thing you can do is kind of everything we were talking about previously, like preparing. So if they would have done kind of the work in the previous meeting and set like realistic expectations and goals, then coming into this meeting, even if, like there's personal feelings that would be coming into play with him and with his wife losing her job and him being a father, if there had been clear expectations, then she could bring up like those in the second meeting, so that like her justifications for future, like for his future job would be more like, these were the expectations that we had laid out for you and you weren't able to meet it. So in the worst case scenario, if he did need to be, let go from the job, there'd be more like structure and like physical objectives that he didn't meet, and it would kind of roll out the personal situation.
Absolutely, right. So I think what I keep hearing is don't surprise, a person, especially, even if they're doing a great job, I'd say, tell them specific ways that they're doing it. But especially if, they're not performing as well, it is unkind to be to surprise a person at the end. And I have done this. I'm not, speaking from a pedestal. I have done this, and I'm like, I don't know how to say this. Then the final eval, here it is. So it was very bad. So I've worked on that. I've improved. So oh yes, and please pronounce your name, Ibithal, please.
Close. It's Ibtihal.
Ibtihal, that's wonderful. Okay, yes.
I was just gonna say, I think it's also important to put into context why you're giving somebody feedback. So I don't know what Matt does in his job, but for all of us, we're taking care of patients. So if you know that the person you're evaluating is maybe doing a poorer job than you want, and you know that that could negatively impact a patient, then I think that makes it a little bit easier to give negative feedback. And I think you can even, when you're talking to the person, put it in that context so that it doesn't feel personal. It's really just about the patient.
That's wonderful, Ibtihal, right? Ibtihal. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, because sometimes it's important to give the stakes, right? So maybe we're in a abilities lab, right? And we're practicing, but in this instance, when you're a resident and you're actually, dosing medications, et cetera, there are people's lives. And even, if you're doing a practice scenario, we need to tell you, these are the stakes when you get things wrong, or, you kind of are not following the correct process. There are stakes to this. So I absolutely love that, to really add, what are the stakes to this and why you're getting this feedback, right? So you may think, oh, well, this is pretty harsh, but it's like someone could have died, right? If that mistake was actually carried out. So I really do love adding that that piece of the feedback, absolutely. And it helps to keep clearly focused on the issue, not that there's anything wrong with you, but this is the issue and this is the concern. So I love that. And Elizabeth also added, addressing those personal feelings up front might help before going into the evaluation. Yes, so absolutely. No, I really do appreciate you sharing that, Elizabeth, sharing that. So we'll move on. And so thank you guys for thinking that through with me. And there'll be more questions to come. So if you didn't get a chance to share your expertise, you'll have more time. But I'm just going to share just a couple of examples of laying out the expectations. And I think that's a lot of, what you all shared and your comments is, what are the expectations, and let's try and be clear about it. So these are just, a couple of points that, I don't think you need to take notes or anything, but you want to schedule a time to review the expectations before the experience starts. And I've done this a couple of times, like, oh yeah, let's squeeze it in between patients and we'll, get it all done. That's a bad idea, right? Because you're not going to be able to clearly lay out what the expectations are. The resident's not going to be able to, trainee's not going to be able to ask questions, and some things get missed. So this is a simple thing, but sometimes we don't practice it consistently because we're busy or, other things come in the way. So try not to do it in between clinic or et cetera. So that's a pretty clear one. The second one, which I think is my favorite and really helps to bring to life all of this criteria that ASHP has. I used to think they just did it as a hazing process, just to punish us with all this paperwork. But it's really painting a picture for the resident or trainee of what achieved looks like. That is what those learning experience descriptions are for. That's what the evaluation criteria is for. Paint a very clear picture so the resident knows what to expect and how to perform, and hopefully they'll perform well at the end. And lastly, no surprises, right? So we already talked about that. Everyone kind of shared that a little bit. Another thing about surprises, sharing things, with the final evaluation is avoiding mission creep, right? So you had that first meeting, you said, this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to see some patients, do some med reds, et cetera. But then, the next couple of weeks, there's something added. And then the preceptor expects that the resident was supposed to know that. It's like, I didn't know that. I didn't know I was supposed to do that. So then there's the mission creep. So I would say avoid surprises in that way, lay everything out on the table. And in the event that you said, you know what, I made a mistake here, I totally forgot to let you know that this is also an expectation, apologize, right? Don't make the resident feel as if they're crazy, right? It's like, oh, you knew you were supposed to do that. How is someone supposed to know if you don't share that with them? But if you, make a mistake and forget to tell them, say, you know what, I really didn't go over this with you in the beginning, but let's, kind of do a little reset so we're clear about what's expected from now on. So those are a few quick pointers. So paint a picture of achieve. So we already talked about laying out expectations in the beginning. I think, we all kind of get that. But does anyone know Bob Ross? I want to see some hands of who watched Bob Ross, and we can see who's old like me. I'm not calling y'all, I'm calling you. Amanda, You know Bob Ross, but anyhow. So he used to be on PBS, when we used to have like 4 channels, we didn't have cable. I love Bob Ross because he made you think that you could paint, right? Oh, awesome. Everyone kind of knows Bob Ross. That's awesome. So thank you, Reed, for for raising your hand at Boa as well. And Pari, awesome. So I loved him because he made you think you could paint. Although I know I can't paint, I'm not artistic in any way, because he lays out the instructions for you so clearly, you think, I think I can do this. So similarly, when we have a trainee starting, we want to be very clear and paint a picture of what achieved is going to look like, and no surprises. So who is it that's going to do well with this experience, right? So you can think about a resident that has performed well in the past, and think about that picture and try and paint that picture both in your learning experience description and also the first day of orientation to share, this is who will do well in this experience. So the resident knows what to expect. And also exactly what are you going to be doing? I think to myself, we say, well, do a med rec, right? It's like, okay, but a med rec is not a med rec. It's not a med rec in a nursing home. If you're doing, and you're in a community pharmacy, if you're in an ambulatory care setting, and depending on the patient population, that medication reconciliation is going to be different. So how do you clarify that to the resident or trainee in the beginning so that they, again, know what to expect? If I've been doing med recs in the community, for a long time, and then I'm in a, intensive care unit, maybe I'm going to use those same skills. So if it's not clear what the expectations are about this med rec, then the resident is not going to do so well. But I don't think it's, necessarily the resident's fault, but the preceptor should have provided a little bit more, a little bit more information about it. And then also, when does it need to be done and how? So let me give you a couple of examples of that. So for our geriatrics residency, and again, this came out as a result of, we really did struggle over how do we clearly communicate goals and expectations to our resident? Because at times we're giving evaluations and the resident didn't agree. And I think it's because our criteria was not clear. So we spent a lot of time during this accreditation cycle to really clarify who is it that should do well, and then what the resident should be doing and how does that look? So whether the resident's doing a self-evaluation or the preceptors are doing the final evaluation, or throughout, we have a clear language that we're using to communicate. We know where we're going, and in the end, no one is surprised. So we actually borrowed this kind of rationale for developing our evaluation criteria from the AmCare 4th year experience. I think it's APPE 450. Shout out to Dr. Rochester. She worked really hard with the preceptors, probably around Baltimore, to develop this criteria. So this is the idea where we got this from. So we have a range of learner behavior from minimal to mastery, and then preceptor delegation from a level 1 to a level 4. And as you can see, our goal with the geriatrics resident is we want them to be an independent geriatric pharmacy specialist. So that's how we're evaluating the objective. Can this person do this independently if they were a geriatric pharmacy specialist? Now, looking more closely at range of learner behavior, I'm not going to go into this in deep detail, but the criteria that we've listed, it is flexible so that it would work in a patient care or non-patient care experience. So we wanted to be clear about the range without being prescriptive about, it looks exactly like this, right? You would use the learning experience description to make it look very exact. The med rec should look like this. But this should say, at the minimum, the resident is demonstrating the ability to do a med rec independently, right? So that's range of learner behavior. But that wasn't even enough, right? So we had a range of learner behavior, in our older iterations of our evaluation criteria. But what we needed was to actually mirror that then with, okay, if you're performing at this level, then as a preceptor, I feel comfortable with delegating you more responsibility. So there's a learner behavior side, but then there's a preceptor side. And sometimes we know as preceptors, I don't trust this resident to do. And then you can go back and fill it in, because sometimes we know, but we're not explaining very clearly. So we wanted the language to be very clear about both expectations on the resident side, and then what I would do if I'm feeling confident about the skills that you're performing, they should match up. So this is, and not that you need to use this in your experience, but it is very helpful if you are very clear about what you expect the resident to do and how that translates into, again, getting them closer to that achieved. So we'll look a little bit at an example, goal, objective, and activity, right? So the last piece of having your, you have your structure of your evaluation tool, that should be clear. But then the second is in your learning experience description, are the activities clear and specific? Have you painted a picture of what a MedRec looks like in your experience, in your learning experience? So can someone share with me what a MedRec looks like in your learning experience, right? So how would that look? Well, let's use one of these criteria. Performing a medication history. So how would someone perform a medication history in your experience? And would this description, this activity description here be enough, right? Would this be enough? Perform a medication history. Residents say, check, I can do that in my sleep, right? So does everyone who, do well on this objective? I would imagine maybe not all the time, but have you provided enough detail so that they really understand the level of detail that you would like? So can someone share on a med history? How would a resident who is performing well perform a med history on your patient in your setting? So anyone want to give an example of that? And I'm trying to see, actually, I can't see raised hands on here for some strange reason. All right. Anyone? Let's see. And maybe I'll ask you, Sandy, I'm assuming in your experience, the residents do med history. So how would that be done well? How would you say that would be done well in your experience? Okay, and Travis, okay, I see your hand.
So I think ideally in our setting, a meta history is done well by speaking directly with the patient to try and get an understanding of what medications they're currently taking at home, to get an understanding of their literacy on their medications, to know if there's an indication for everything that they're taking, as well as trying to get some amount of understanding of their compliance to those meds. So that way you can go through and do an evaluation of their disease states and see if we're properly treating everything that they have diagnosed. And that's obviously in a perfect world where you have patients who are with it and are not altered in any sense. I know during COVID, it was a lot different too, in terms of having to reach out to a lot of pharmacies and other things to try and look at filling history in order to determine what people might be taking regularly.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome, Travis. Now, I'm looking at this evaluation criteria. It says perform med history on assigned patient. You included a lot more information there. You said assessing health literacy, being able to communicate with the patient to elicit this information, to assess their compliance and medications that they're on, as well as disease states. So if you were to put this in your learning experience description, it would not be wrong. ASHP would not give you any trouble. But would this set the resident up for success in your experience, right? Our experience are all a little bit different. So this was just a point here to encourage you, to have a look at your activities to see if you're disappointed with the level of what the resident is performing something. Have a look at your activities to see if you can explain that a little more in detail so that they know what to expect and what a picture of achieved looks like. So I'm going to go to an example of mine. So this is just an example. And again, this is me learning over the years. In my clinic, we have older adults that are sometimes cognitively impaired and they have family members, right? So we need a resident to learn how to engage with the patient and the family, but keeping the patient at the center of the discussion. So I adjusted our activities not to just say, okay, be able to communicate with the patient, but helping them to understand the interaction and how to manage that interaction between patient, you, and caregiver, right? Because we always want to make the patient feel as if they're the center of the interview, not just like some ancillary person that's just kind of sitting there. Also, I'm a bit of a maniac about education. So as you can see, I have a 15-step process to make sure you're educating the patient correctly, but that's just me. That's my experience. And this is what achieve looks like for me, not interview the patient, So this is just an example of fleshing out your activities to clearly show the resident what there is to expect. And it is a reference also. If they're not getting there, you say, have a look at that activity again to see how you can, add this or add that, and you can include that in your written evaluation. All right, next. Lastly, I want to highlight here again, setting up expectations is the expected level of progression. This is a part of the learning experience description that I kind of didn't get for a while, but now I totally get it. I have various levels of learners at different times. So what I had to do was adjust the level of expectation based on the learner, right? I don't expect a PGY1 to be able to perform at the level of a PGY2 geriatric pharmacy resident in my geriatrics clinic. So you can use the expected progression to adjust the level of expectations for the resident, for the trainee, and also use this now as feedback if the resident is not, performing those things again. So it's not a surprise on the front end. And also when you give them the evaluation is saying, well, you're not really conducting visits independently, et cetera, by this week, this is going to be a challenge with you to achieve this goal or objective. So I just wanted to give those couple of examples about how to lay out the expectations clearly, both with the evaluation criteria, but also in the learning experience description with the activities and the expected levels of progression week to week. And this is just laying out the preceptor qualifications in the ASHP standards that basically says that we need to be providing feedback all along the way. And I think someone shared that feedback, verbal feedback all along the way. So it's not a surprise, but certainly written feedback towards the end, but it should be criteria based. So your learning experience description should provide plenty of criteria for you to use when you're providing written evaluations. So looking at an actual preceptor comment, I found this in an article. It's absolutely lovely. This is not a comprehensive list, but it provides some examples of questions that a preceptor could look to answer to provide feedback. Because sometimes you're starting an evaluation, you're like, oh, what should I say? I have so many things to say, but I'm not sure what to land on. Well, maybe using something like this as a beginning list of questions for you to answer. So a good preceptor comment answers some of these different questions, right? So what skills should be should the resident focus on future learning experiences? And this is a good one if someone's doing a great job, right? You don't know what to say. You're like, you're doing great. I don't have much to add, but they can still grow and learn. So that might be a good one if someone's performing well, but also if someone needs improvement. So what are the new areas for improvement that were identified, but then also how can the resident improve in the future? So this is a nice little reference. I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but a great way to assist you with writing criteria-based feedback. And again, using your learning experience description to provide specific examples based on the resident's experience. And lastly, with regards to written feedback, is one strategy that we learned from an ASHP surveyor is to use action-oriented feedback. What do you want the resident to keep doing, improve, start, or stop? And it's a really easy mnemonic that we said preceptors, we're all going to use it. So it helps us to be consistent and it's just easy to remember. So maybe you're thinking with the resident, I want you to start reviewing patients before clinic because you're not getting visits done on time. You're taking a really long time collecting information during the interview. Or you can pose it as a question. How can you improve your patient review process so that you're on time to see your patient? So there's a couple of ways that you can use this criteria. I have found hundreds of ways to use this in all types of experiences, but it's a really good way to be sure that the feedback that you're providing can be acted on by the resident. All right. So now we'll look at a couple of preceptor comments to determine if they are effective or if they need improvement. And you can, feel free, and I'll leave the screen up just because it's obviously easier for you guys to read. But the preceptor comments, we'll just look at a couple. And how about this preceptor comment? The resident needs to be more organized with data collection. Is that an achieve or does that one need improvement? Achieve satisfactory progress or needs improvement. How can we dress that up or make it a little bit more criteria based or action oriented in the way they're providing the feedback? And I'll ask Angela, I see your face kind of at the top bubble here.
Yeah, so this feedback can be more specific in terms of, let's say the criteria are to be like a specific format that perhaps either chronologically or starting from subjective to objective data. So something that can be a way that the other person is easily understood.
Right. No, I love that, Angela. Thank you for sharing that. So you're saying add a little bit of sort of a timeline of what you do, more organized. Okay, so collect the patient's past medical history first, okay, before you get to the medication, however you want to do it, but it gives some clear, specific action items for the resident to do or trainee to do to be more organized. So I absolutely love that. And obviously there's many ways you can provide feedback, but that's just one example. So how about your presentation went well? You appeared comfortable and received mostly positive evaluations. So I asked Merton, what do you think about that one? Your presentation went well, you appeared comfortable and received mostly positive evaluations.
Well, I definitely feel like positive feedback is a lower bar to clear. People receive it well and all of that, and this is positive. So I think it would fit in the achieved category, or kind of like telling someone they achieved the objective. I think it does, that mostly positive evaluations kind of points to something I might not have picked up otherwise, which is that it's not very specific. So even with what went well, what went well, right?
Right.
And did the things that go well, do those appear to be things that demonstrate positive presentation skills that will apply in other settings also? Or is it just like you had good chemistry with that particular presentation, So I think that areas to improve on this comment or make the comment more effective is to kind of drill down more specifically. And I think it speaks to what you were saying about when you're setting up the activity to have very specific ideas of what was reached, because I think that would help here, right? That if you had a specific vision of the good presentation, then you could point to whatever it was. Learning objectives were very clear. Like interactive presentation was well achieved, and whatever specifically went well, that then breaks it down into the particular skills.
No, that's awesome. Thank you, Merton. That was excellent feedback. And what went well? Tell the resident what they went well. Keep doing this, because that went well, right? So tell them what they should keep doing. Great job is nice, went well is nice, but I don't know what are those skills that, I excelled at, I'm really good at, and how I can continue to, replicate that. In addition, mostly positive evaluations, what was positive and maybe what were areas of feedback. And I think this is a really important comment because, again, sometimes we have just as much trouble providing helpful, constructive feedback to those who are doing great, right? It's like, well, you did great, and sometimes it's hard to find something, but say what they're doing well and tell them to keep doing that. So that's really awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Merton. And we can certainly go on, but, you kind of get my drift here. We want to be specific, using information from your learning experience description to provide some criteria, but then also tell the resident what you want them to do. You want them to keep doing this, improve, start, or stop doing something so that they know exactly how they can remediate. All right, so we're going to go to another example. And actually this is, hold on. All right, so now we're going to get into actual performance feedback, the actual verbal piece of performance feedback. And this is actually just probably more so for entertainment purposes. So we're going to get into performance feedback.
It's time. Do you have everything you need?
Yes, I believe so.
Ready then? Sure. Ready?
Yes.
Oh. Ready?
Okay. Bring it.
Ready?
Oh, just a second. I haven't made my choice yet.
I wore Mr. Steel Toe today.
No! No!
Okay, so I certainly don't advocate for violence, right? But sometimes maybe we feel like, oh, I'd prefer to be doing anything else or be anywhere else rather than getting this performance review. And if you would like a little entertainment in your day, I have included in the link all the links to the videos that I have I've used. But now seriously, but sometimes we feel that way. Okay, so back to our discussion here. So doing performance evaluations, right? Sometimes that brings up some emotions. It's a bit of a challenge. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you tend to handle difficult conversations? And you can put it in the chat there. Feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, some are middle of the road, some are a little better at 7s, 6s, some 5s, right? So sometimes maybe I'm interpreting this as sometimes you're thinking, I just don't even want to be here. Okay, we have a goal of a 7, getting better. That's awesome. But a lot of us are probably middle of the road. I agree. I think I would be sort of in the middle of the road there, where I would love to get to that place where I'm open and I'm like, I love providing feedback and having challenging conversations, but I'm so not there yet. And some people have no problem, having challenging conversations, but they're a little aggressive and they're not as open, and it seems more of a confrontation than it is providing feedback. So one of the big things that I want to emphasize here is when we're providing verbal feedback, the goal is for us to be working together with the resident or trainee to help them get better, because eventually you're going to be in our position. So we want to model the open and effective way of providing feedback versus, being confrontational or, just running away. And that just takes practice, right? We all need a little bit more practice in this area. So we have our scenario, and this is where you will get to practice your feedback skills. And this is a mosaic of all sorts of things. It was me, it was residents, it was everyone. So I just threw it kind of all in there. So it starts out with the resident who is finishing your ambulatory care experience this week mentions in passing that they're looking forward to the evaluation because they feel they did a great job. However, from your perspective, the resident has not performed well. You have not, although you have not provided a lot of formative feedback about these issues because you believe that at this level, the resident should know better. During interviews, the resident is not unkind, but gives the impression of being disinterested and is always checking their phone. The resident finishes most visits within 8 to 10 minutes, regardless of how complex the patient is, and the preceptor needs to return to the room to request additional information before developing an assessment and plan. And although the resident calls or texts in a timely manner, they've been late to clinic several times. When they arrive to clinic, clinic's already started, and the resident is flustered and quickly trying to review their notes before seeing the patient. So what would be the story that you'd be telling yourself? And actually, I'll go back. So what story would you be telling yourself about this resident, right? So right now, we have not had a conversation with the resident. What would you be telling yourself about this resident? What would be the story? And you probably have a story going on in your mind right now about this scenario. What do you think is happening with this resident?
It sounds like the resident has a lot going on in their personal life and it's spilling into their what's going on in the clinic, their responsibilities in the clinic.
Okay, no, I love that comment, right? So maybe the resident has kind of something going on in the background. What are some other thoughts? And that could certainly be the case. And I think one big part of coming into a good conversation is really figuring out what am I thinking is happening, right? Because sometimes you kind of overlay that over what's really happening and we don't even bother to find out. We're just like, this is what's happening. This is what the resident's going to get or trainee's going to get. So maybe they have something personal going on. What are some other thoughts?
It mentioned that specifically the preceptor noticed these, but admitted not providing a lot of formative feedback since the level the resident should know better. But maybe they never received this feedback before. So expecting that the resident should know better, I would say, is something that the preceptor should give for like constructive feedback all across the rotation, not necessarily just leaving it towards the end, because then that leads to like miscommunication and thinking they did great when in reality they probably weren't.
Absolutely, and I believe that was Karen who shared that. Okay, thank you, Karen. And absolutely, right. So when we make assumptions about what people know, then it becomes again, that challenge at the final evaluation, where you're more working from assumptions versus what you told the resident that you would really expect. So I see a comment here. And Emily said the resident's not being professional, coming in late, being on their phone during interviews. Absolutely, right? So being on that phone sometimes can be a barrier. But maybe someone, we were doing a workshop on, what is it? I forget. We were doing standardized patient training, and they call some people who were evaluating, they call them doves and sharks, right? So I would be one of those sharks, be like, this is what we expect, there's no leeway. And then others, might say, well, I think the person may have some personal issues. And you have to kind of know yourself. The way that you may jump to conclusions is just what our minds do. We jump to conclusions. So it's important to examine where my mind might go, right? And making sure that I examine that. So yeah, it's definitely not professional to be on the phone during the interview, not on the phone, checking the phone, but maybe they were checking a drug database. I don't know. That would be the dove and someone else. That wouldn't be me. I'd be assuming maybe not something so pleasant. The resident may need to work on their insight. Thank you, Amanda and Merton. And that's a good point, Merton. Maybe based on some previous experiences, maybe they were told you have 10 minutes, get it done, right? So clarifying expectations, learning a little bit more about the resident situation. I think there's several things that need to be done here in this discussion, but I think first pausing, to figure out what am I thinking about what's going on is really important. And the first comment that I would add here is to be side by side, right? We're trying to figure out something here. What's happening with the resident? What have I done on my part that I could have done better, right? I could have done better to provide more clear expectations, because even if you're like, I'm only 1% responsible for this, we do need to honor and admit to maybe the part where we played a role in the resident's performance. So side by side would be the first thing I would say. The second one, providing feedback, is being clear. Clear is kind. So when the preceptor is giving this feedback or whatever it is, or when they're going in to have the discussion, be clear and stick to the facts, right? So what you're on your phone during the interview, maybe asking a little bit more about that. This is what I have noticed, right? So we're not being, you're hitting the facts, but you're being, you're trying to learn more. Again, we're on the same side of the table. We're on the same side trying to improve, versus you're on your phone all the time. This is absolutely unacceptable, right? You can say that too, but are you really, speaking to a colleague in that way? And does that help to strengthen the relationship? So being clear. Absolutely. And I see Marissa, thank you for sharing that. It could have been an issue with clear expectations. Absolutely. And oops. And there's a video here, but we don't have time to go through it. It talks about mastering your story, basically really exploring what you're thinking about the situation before you go in and go into the conversation to really learn what the actual facts are. So that's what that video is about. And I have the link in the comments there. So the next part of a conversation, again, particularly if you're having a challenging conversation, is to, and some of the videos I've been using has been from the Crucial Conversations. It's a book. they have trainings and all of that, but how to do a better job of having conversations that are difficult. And one of the big concepts that really stuck in my mind was adding to the pool of shared meaning, right? So there's a side of the resident and then there's a side of a preceptor. The preceptor may add to the pool a fact. I noticed that you're on your phone during the interview. Tell me what's happening there, right? So now you've invited the resident to add their meaning to the pool. And the goal is in all of this is to simply have a dialogue so that we can get to what our action steps are, where we're both working together versus the trainee getting assaulted. This is unacceptable. We're not going to do that here. And this is what you need to do, right? Again, we're training future preceptors. So we want to model good conversation skills. So this is a really nice model. They explain it in lots of words, but the biggest thing for our purposes is invite the other person to add to the pool of meaning, especially in these instances where there's likely two sides of the story that are contributing to this outcome. So maybe one of the outcomes might be the preceptor may say, you know, I apologize. I didn't share this with you that, you know, you're expected to do this in, you know, 45 minutes. I don't know however long the visit is. And maybe you're not collecting this or that, but the preceptor should clarify their expectations, and the resident should be able to acknowledge when there's areas where they may not be meeting the expectation. And lastly, let's get ready to rumble. I found this in the Dare to Lead hub from Brene Brown. She's like one of my favorite people. And there is also, as part of that feedback, a way that you provide feedback that invites dialogue, and it also invites strengthening the relationship between the preceptor and the trainee. So she uses the word rumble, right, which doesn't sound pleasant, but actually the rumble is more about how can I empathize with that person as I'm sharing maybe this unpleasant information. So first she talks about, again, examining what is the story that I am making up about the situation that may have me very flustered and angry and annoyed, right? And master that and say, well, now that 90% of that is your imagination and only 10% of this is actually what the resident is doing. Let's focus on that. Inviting the resident into dialogue, maybe saying, I'm really curious about, you know, why are you on your cell phone, you know, using your cell phone during a visit? I'm really curious about. I noticed that you've been coming to clinic, you know, several times late. I appreciate you sending a message or give me a call, but I would love to understand what might be happening personally that's preventing you from getting to clinic on time. So really asking questions to be curious, to understand what the other person's side of the story is, so that the goal is we're getting to a shared agreement about what the next steps need to be. And a quote from Brene Brown says that empathy is the ability to tap into our own experiences in order to connect with the experience of someone else. And compassion is the willingness to be open to the process. So really empathy is me thinking of, you know what, I was a resident, and I always share this story about me being a trainee when I was at the VA, and it was like my first really challenging patient, and I was a mess. I was like, oh my goodness, this patient, he's breathing hard, he's gained like 50 pounds, and I think we need to take him to the emergency room. And the preceptor was like, okay, that was not a presentation. Okay, you look like you're having a meltdown, right? So I share that experience with the residents when they have like that meltdown presentation, to say I was there too. Now let's talk about how we can move to having a beginning, middle, and end when we're doing a patient presentation, so we can really identify how to do that more effectively, so that we're coming to a really clear plan. So, and this is a video on empathy. I would suggest, you know, looking at this in your spare time. It's a lovely video that really talks about what empathy is and what empathy is not. But she really does a great job with that. So this is my little mnemonic. I just literally I made this up, right? But it's how we can approach a conversation about feedback. Again, working together, training the resident or trainee to become, again, that preceptor providing feedback, and then coming to some conclusion about what needs to be done next. So side by side, sticking to the facts. Again, in our imagination, we may be thinking the resident's doing something for this or that reason, but sticking to the facts, expressing empathy, and staying in dialogue. So I'm going to turn off my screen here and ask, we'll go back to our patient case. I'm not patient case. And as we close, I'm going to ask, how can we, in this resident situation, give them this final evaluation, you know, in a way that we are practicing empathy and sticking to the facts and staying in dialogue. So how could we approach this discussion with the resident? So, and you can pick any one of the, you know, issues that were identified. I used one or two, but, and I'll take this screen off for a moment. Okay. So, so how would you deal with this resident's situation, right? How would you approach that? Again, in a way that invites them to kind of join in the process. And I haven't called on you, Bobby. You're like right in the middle of my screen. So how could you approach this? You know, expressing empathy, staying in dialogue, right? Getting them to add their meaning to the pool, right? So you can get at some conclusion. So how might you approach this?
I think specifically with the meetings only taking, or the interviews only taking 8 to 10 minutes and the preceptor having to go back and ask more questions. I think one good way to approach it is to, you know, tell the trainee, you know, I've noticed that you've been able to complete these interactions relatively quickly within 10 minutes, but I've had to kind of help you gather more information. So do you mind like walking me through your process for the interview, and then allowing the trainee to kind of tell you their thought process, what goes on in the room, because I'm assuming that the preceptor is not in there seeing it themselves. And then also by doing so, you can kind of see where they're coming from and then offer advice and ways to improve certain aspects of their interview, maybe leaving out some things that are inefficient or adding in things that they might be missing, things like that, instead of just kind of assuming that, you know, maybe they're just rushing through everything and missing things, rather than kind of performing a much more effective and efficient interview.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Bobby. So really understanding, you know, what their process is and say, let me take a look at, see what you're doing, and we can do some editing, right? Not that you have to, you know, scrap the whole process, but maybe the process you're using worked for that setting, but this is maybe what we need to add or delete from your process. And then there's your action plan, right? Stop doing this, start doing that, improve this, or, you know, or that. So gives a very clear path forward. And then also the resident feels like you're with them, right? And helping them to improve versus, oh, now I feel like the worst resident, you know, and I'm not going to, you know, make it to my goals. And then lastly, I will say, so how could the resident give feedback to the preceptor, right? We don't often talk about that angle, but there's two sides to this. So how could we use our empathetic language, right? Because again, there is a power differential here, you know, let's acknowledge that. How could you, in an empathetic way, ask the resident, ask the preceptor how they could improve now on better preparing you for what to expect? How could we do that? And then I promise I'm going to close. Okay, Amanda, we'll let you take it home.
Okay, so going off the same thing, since I think that's a really good example of something that could happen with residents, as far as like the interview taking too, being too quick and missing some information. So as the resident, like I would probably notice if my preceptor went in and had to collect more information. So I would probably have a conversation with them where it'd be like, you know, I noticed that you've been going in and collecting more information, and I feel as though I'm missing some major points as far as what needs to be done for data collection. Can you talk to me about the process and what's expected in a standard interview so that I can meet expectations?
Absolutely. That's awesome, right? So you're asking, okay, and it also shows that you are being proactive, about your learning, and that always is really showing maturity and professionalism. So just asking, I noticed that you keep revising all of my notes. What can I do differently, or what, how can I change that? So, to understand what are you really looking for in the notes? Because I'm thinking this is what you want, but maybe that's not it. So with that, thank you all for joining in on the discussion. And again, I put in the link, a little bit more resources about this, but I hope that this was helpful to help with your feedback and evaluation process in your learning experiences. So thanks everyone. I look forward to seeing lots of you in person in the future. Thank you.